Welcome to the C Analysis podcast. I'm your host, Chaz Nuttycombe, the director of C Analysis. Today, we are joined by Ben Tribbett. Ben, this is your third time on the show, so I hope for our frequent listeners, you need no introduction, but for those who may be new tuning into the podcast, Ben is a Democratic consultant from Fairfax, Virginia, and he's been predicting elections on the state legislative level, specifically for Virginia, quite longer than I have. Ben, I know that you haven't posted any public predictions. So the goal of this podcast is to get your predictions on these races we see as competitive, C Analysis, and see where you and I differ. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Glad to be here.
Well, let's hop right into it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting from the least competitive districts on the left to the least competitive districts on the right. So it's going to go very likely Democrat, likely D, lean D, tilt D, toss up, tilt R, lean R, likely R, very likely R. So we're not going over any, solids, which are uncompetitive seats. But yeah, so let's get right into it. Starting off with House District 13, this is Danica Roem's seat. I think that she is a very heavy favorite in her reelection bid. I could see an argument, maybe depending on how the campaign turns out by the Republican and what the campaign finance reports show over the coming months, that it could be a solid Democratic race. I think that Danica Roem could honestly win by double digits again. I know she won in 2017 by I want to say it was 8 points or 9 points, beating Bob Marshall. And I think she can do even better than that. Ben, what do you think about this race?
Well, I think Danica is the heavy favorite. Some of the things that I used to sort of conjecture where I would rate a race, you're going to hear over and over today, Chaz. So don't get bored when we come back to some of the same things again and again. But on Danica's race, I look at a couple things. Number one, where does the race start from when she won it in 2017? And obviously in 2017 against an incumbent, she ran behind the top of the ticket by a decent margin. And so like most of the 2017 class, the top of the ticket really helped to bring her in. A normal performance on top of the ticket, like what had been there in 2013, probably wouldn't have been enough to bring her in that tide. But once you are elected, then that those mathematics all shift, and it really becomes about what kind of legislator you are, what kind of job you're doing. And I think that she's made a very difficult case for being ousted because she's been so active on local community issues that are important there. And so I don't see Danica running behind the top of the ticket this election. I think that Danica will run with the top of the ticket or maybe even slightly ahead. And the top of the ticket should win a district like the 13th. If Terry McAuliffe is losing the 13th to Glenn Youngkin, he's got big problems on his hands.
He's lost the race. If he's not winning the 13th, he's lost the statewide.
So that's why I would say Danica is such a heavy favorite. Is we think that the governor's race at least is going to be close, in which case that should put the 13th on the left of that ledger. And I don't see any reason to think Danica would run behind the top of the ticket. So that's why I make her such a substantial favorite in this race.
Rating wise, what would you say? I know you, when it comes to ratings, you don't have a very likely column. I'm the only person with that. And that you say for what I would call tilt, tilt Republican, tilt Democratic, you say slight leans. For those who aren't aware of how you cast your predictions, but rating wise, what would you say?
I put it in the likely category because it's not impossible to imagine in a large Republican win, if they got momentum statewide, that they could carry the 13th district again. And in a large Republican win where they carried the 13th, the seat could flip. But I don't see that being a plausible scenario. So I would put it in the likely category.
Okay. And one of the things that if Danica Roem were to overperform the top of the ticket, do better than Terry McAuliffe does. That's something that only two Democrats who were elected in the Virginia House got to do. And that was Jennifer Carroll Foy, who flipped the second that year, and Chris Hurst. So it would be quite a feat if she did pull that off. House District 50, this is Lee Carter's seat. Lee Carter lost his primary to Michelle Maldonado. I think this is a very likely Democratic race. Lee was a notorious electoral underperformer.
Chaz, as I recall on this one, he actually was pretty close to McAuliffe. I think he was closer than some of the others in 2017, which is what surprised everyone so much and sort of gave us all sort of an idea of that perhaps the Democratic campaigns that year had not been as good as everyone thought they were in terms of the down ballot victories, because Lee, who had the least of a campaign, ran the closest to McAuliffe and Prince William that was against an incumbent.
Yeah. And I know in 2017, I think a lot of people would say his win was an upset, but, again, there was only so much ticket splitting that would be going on between, Northam handily beating Ed Gillespie in the Manassas area. But yeah, I think Michelle Maldonado is, a pretty solid candidate. And I don't really think the Republican candidate is running a serious campaign. I haven't seen anything that suggests that. How would you rate this district?
Well, Chaz, in open seats, and obviously we're going to go through a few of these, including the neighboring 51st in a minute. Open seats tend to have very low crossover rates. One of the big sort of upsets I put on the horizon in 2017 that we said was a toss-up race, and I think many people laughed at, was the 28th district with Josh Colt. And even though he was not a very good candidate, that seat was open that year. And Fredericksburg had consistently been a very close area the whole Fredericksburg area seat had been a competitive area in statewide elections. Democrats carried it by a few points a couple of times. And so I kept putting it on the horizon out there of there's not a lot of crossover that goes on in open seat races. It's just much harder to do. And when you have a open seat race, the top of the ticket really, really dominates who's going to come in with it. And so in this case, Michelle, who got a really good upset victory in the June primary and is now going to probably become a delegate, I think she looks up ticket, and same as Danica Rome's district, perhaps even a little bit bluer. It's very hard to imagine a scenario where in any sort of competitive governor's race that Glenn Youngkin carries the city of Manassas. So I would put it in the same category as we'll put some of the others and say this one is likely Democratic.
Okay. House District 93, this is Mike Mullen's seat. This was a seat that was redrawn in 2019. Did get a little bit redder in redistricting, but is still a Democratic-leaning district. Mike Mullen was first elected in the 2016 special election, and he is one of he is the whip in the House or the majority whip. I think Mike Mullen is a pretty heavy favorite for re-election, given that he won by double digits, if I recall correctly, in 2019. But not only that, this is, again, one of those seats that I don't really see a remotely strong Republican campaign. Now, I will say that the GOP is trying something different here. They got the same candidate to run against Mike 3 times in a row, 2017, 2019, and 2016 special. But I don't think he's really much better. Jordan Gray, the Republican. Ben, how would you rate this seat? We have it as very likely Democratic.
Yeah, Chaz, so a couple of things on this is I'm not really impressed with Jordan Gray. He hasn't come out of the gate really making any sort of push here, but I think Mike Mullen is a little bit more vulnerable of a Democrat than people may initially put down. His district is not far off of the statewide medians in a lot of elections. And I don't think he's done a lot to be able to, in a competitive race, get a lot of crossover votes. So I think that on the horizon, he's vulnerable. But you still have to have a candidate against him who can fully maximize that, and the Republicans have to have a good year. And we don't know yet that the Republicans are going to have that really good year. And it doesn't look like there's a candidate against him that will maximize it. So I'll also put this as likely Democratic, but an exception from the other two that we've talked about earlier. I actually think should the Republicans get their act together or dump money into here, this is one I would consider more for leans Democratic if the Republicans got a real campaign together.
Yeah. Well, it's not a majority maker seat, it's farthest from. So I'd be surprised if they actually tried to spend against Mike Mullen, especially getting burned in 2019 and 2017. Next one is in House District 31. This one is a little bit more competitive than the ones we've gone through so far in our forecast. This is Elizabeth Guzman's seat. This is her third time running for the seat. She first beat Scott Lingenfelter in 2017. And she had a closer re-election than I thought she did, or she would in 2019. But the Republican here, Ben Baldwin, again, this is the further these seats that we're going through so far, and obviously, as we get more to the competitive seats, that's going to change. But the Republicans don't really look like they're going to be doing much against Elizabeth Guzman this year. I don't think Ben Baldwin is a really great candidate. I think what was the guy in 2019's name? I think it was something Jordan.
Yeah, DJ Jordan.
DJ Jordan. I think he was a great candidate in retrospect, and I'm surprised that they weren't able to get him for that seat again. But yeah, we have this seat as likely Democratic. That's an improvement from where we had it before the primary. It leans Democratic because, Guzman has the incumbency advantage. But yeah, Ben, how would you rate this race?
Chaz, I'm going to put this one as leans Democratic for right now because it has a decent chunk of Fauquier County in the district. I think it's about a fourth of the districts in Fauquier County. And that's the kind of area where if Republicans were going to see a bounce back, and we got a fire truck going past us here, but if the Republicans were going to see a bounce back, I think that's the kind of area where they would see a larger bounce back. And so that could skew the numbers a little bit. But the parts of Prince William County where Elizabeth Guzman represents are so just core Democratic areas. This seat, if I remember correctly, Chaz, I think actually voted for Ed Gillespie over Mark Warner just a few years ago. So it's one that, is always on the horizon. And obviously Elizabeth only won by 5 points last time. So I'm going to put this as leans Democratic, but I also agree with you that the Republican candidate is less impressive. And I would be closer to putting it towards likely than I would to be putting it to toss up.
Okay. House District 51. This is Hala Ayala's seat. I think the Democratic candidate, Brianna Sewell, is if not the best recruits for the House Democratic Caucus, to be quite frank. She's got a lot of money. She's a first-time candidate for the House of Delegates. I think she's a great match for the district. And honestly, the GOP primary here was pretty. I mean, it was just a shot in the dark and trying to predict it. I mean, anybody who's a Republican who I talked to said, I don't know anything about this race, this primary, because it's not really on their radar. The 51st isn't a majority maker seat. I think that Brianna Sewell, is in a likely Democratic race. But what do you think, Ben?
Well, Chaz, we'll go back to that rule about open seats. And open seats, it's very hard to win much crossover from your top of your ticket. So in this race, again, let's take a look at what the top of the ticket's going to be like. And this one is interesting. I believe that this is one of the 3 seats in Prince William County that voted for Ken Cuccinelli for governor back in 2013. And it was drawn to be, to go back to ancient history, Chaz, the 51st had been a safe Republican seat for most of the early 2000s. It had been in Democratic hands before that in South Prince William because it's centered in the Occoquan area. And Michelle McQuigg, who was the Republican delegate, had been the Occoquan district supervisor, was very well known locally. when she left and moved up, there was an open seat race. She moved up to clerk of the court in 2007. Um, and the Republicans had a very moderate school board candidate that she was trying to hand the seat off to named Julie Lucas, who proceeded to lose the nomination to Faisal Gill. And Faisal, who now, by the way, Chaz, since then, after being a Ken Cuccinelli acolyte, has went on to quit the Republican Party a few years ago, moved to Vermont to become Democratic Party chair, then moved to Los Angeles and is now running for LA City Attorney as a liberal Democrat.
Huh.
But back in these days, Faisal was a hardline conservative, and he won the nomination. And because he was such a bad candidate, the Democrats with Paul Nichols were able to pick the seat up by, I don't know if it was 1 or 2 points. It was a very narrow victory in 2007. Fast forward to the 2009 landslide, and Rich Anderson was able to get the seat back for the Republicans, down ballot from Bob McDonnell, and they immediately redrew the seat. And one of the things that you have to remember about the 51st, because of that history, and we're still under those lines, is the Republicans put in some of their best precincts that they could reach into the 51st from neighboring districts to try to shore up Rich Anderson, because he was the only one who was in trouble. That shoring up of Rich Anderson probably is what led to them losing every seat in South Prince William in 2017, because they had drawn them all to be roughly equal, where if they had kept Anderson's as being more Democratic, there would have there's a decent chance that Scott Lingenfelter could have perhaps survived if he had kept Brentsville, for example. And so this seat at the early part of the decade was a Republican seat. This is the Republican part of South Prince William County. It's very carefully drawn to include as many Republicans as possible. Now, at that same time, the Occoquan area is really representative of what's been going on nationally, where there's a lot of suburban Democrats that are people voting Democratic because they can't stand Trump. They couldn't stand anything about it. So pre-Trump, this was a Republican seat. Post-Trump, it's been a Democratic seat. And we haven't had an election in it since, or during Trump, it was a Democratic seat. And we haven't had an election in it since Trump left. And so, because we don't know about that yet, and because we know the rule of open seats is they tend to follow the top of the ticket very carefully, I think this is the type of seat where you're more likely to see Glenn Youngkin make a breakthrough in a close race against Terry McAuliffe than in any of the other Prince William seats, because the voters are so swingy. Again, this was a Cuccinelli district just 2 cycles ago. I believe it voted for Ed Gillespie by not double digits, but probably almost double digits over Mark Warner in 2014. So this is very much competitive territory historically, but it's full of swing voters that move away from the Republican Party during Trump. So this is one I have my eyes on for election night of. It's going to tell us a lot about the rest of the country next year. And it's going to tell us a lot about how long that effect, whether did Republicans lose these voters permanently, or did they lose them in the era of Trump? And if they even split them, that should be enough for the Democrats to continue to carry this area and for Breonna to be successful. So I'm going to put the race at leans Democratic. But if the Republicans are successful in getting most of their voters back from where they were pre-Trump in an area like this, and again, Chaz, we're talking about people that voted for Ken Cuccinelli. So these were not moderate Republicans necessarily, and that we're just talking about when we're talking about a big swath of Republicans. If they can get some of those voters back that gave Ed Gillespie a pretty big victory here in 2014, they could win the seat. And this is the kind of place where you would expect to see Glenn Youngkin potentially make a breakthrough. Again, Gillespie lost the state by, a point? And I think he carried this one, I don't know if you have it in front of you, Chaz, but memory serving like 6 or 7, maybe 8 points was Ed Gillespie's margin here. And so this seat was 7 points to the right of Virginia in just 2014. And so I would put it as a leans Democratic for now, but it's one that's going to be really interesting going to the fall.
Yeah, I think if the 51st were to flip, obviously the Republicans had taken over the House of Delegates, but more importantly, it would it would pretty much confirm a total or near total suburban reversion, because this seat it is pretty blue, or at least it was pretty blue in the Trump era. I still think it is a Democratic leaning seat. And I am not really impressed with Tim Cox's campaign. I think there will be little suburban reversion. I do think the Republicans are going to make some gains in the suburbs here in Virginia and in the 2022 midterms. But I don't think there's going to be a total suburban reversion to, something like, what you were saying, 2014. I don't think where it's going to be a very, very, very long time before we see a Republican win Loudoun County like Ed Gillespie did.
And I think the important thing here, Chaz, is we got to remember there's districts that have swing voters, and then there's districts that are static, right? And Loudoun has a lot of swing voters. This district has a lot of swing voters. And so it didn't just magically one day go from a district that voted to the right of statewide results in 2013 and 2014, and then suddenly became to the left of statewide results thereafter. That wasn't just a switch that went off. That's independent voters that began moving away from the Republican Party the moment they dominated Donald Trump, and then couldn't stop running away fast enough during the entire Trump era. But this seat is quintessential Prince William County. It's going to tell us a lot about the Prince William elections in 2023. And, it's one that, because they're swing voters, we have to see how they're going to react. And no one knows that yet. I'm not sure the voters themselves know yet how they're going to react. And I don't know how you go from being a Cuccinelli Gillespie voter to being a straight Democratic voter for 4 years, but this district is packed full of them.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the 68th. This is in the Richmond area. Dawn Adams is running for re-election. She was first elected in the 2017 wave in what I would say is an upset. She beat a pretty popular moderate Republican incumbent Manoli Lupasi by, I think it was like 300 votes. Then she won by, I think it was like 9 points in 2019. I don't think Dawn is going to get another leftward swing to where she wins by double digits over Mark Earley Jr. Mark Earley Jr. is the son of former Virginia Attorney General Mark Earley, who lost to Mark Warner in the 2001 gubernatorial election. But I think Dawn is heavily favored. Now, I think there could be an argument for leans Democratic if Mark Earley builds a campaign. I think there's that it wouldn't surprise me if he did. But at this point, just given this seat, I know this seat likes moderate Republicans, and Mark Earley may try and go that route. But I think that it's just not there anymore to elect one anymore. I think there's going to be a swing. I think Dawn is going to have her second tightest race in her career. I think this race is probably something within 8 points, 7 points even. But I still see her as a heavy favorite. We see this race. We have the rating for this race is likely Democratic. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, Chaz, I would put this one at leans Democratic and potentially warning signs for even closer. The first ward in Richmond City, which is the biggest chunk of this district, is the quintessential swing voters in the Richmond area. I remember this district back when it was Rock Rib Republican, was one of the districts that broke through in 2006 to vote against the marriage amendment. It's always been a socially liberal, fiscally conservative area full of swing voters, many of which, because it's in Richmond, are highly informed about state politics and bounce around in elections with big crossover margins. I want to say, Chaz, and again, I apologize, I'm having to do some of this from memory. I feel like this was one of the districts where there was the biggest gap in 2013. It might have been a Cuccinelli district, it might have been a McAuliffe district, but there was a humongous gap between that race and the lieutenant governor's race, which Ralph Northam just won overwhelmingly. And it's because the voters here are so well informed that they really had locked into who Ralph Northam was, being a moderate state senator, who E.W. Jackson was, and being sort of a radical Republican candidate. And so they were able to recognize that. Other districts, when you saw them, when they voted the same for governor and lieutenant governor that year, it told you that just the voters were not super well informed. This is one of those districts where the voters are extremely well informed. And so I think this is always a challenging area for Democrats historically, but it's also a quintessential. A lot of it's in the city of Richmond. It's still a quintessential sort of suburban feel to the district and exactly the kind of voters that have been moving away from Republicans all over the country. So again, I think this is one of those districts where you look at and you say, Glenn Youngkin needs to do well here in order to be successful. And if he does win it, Dawn's probably going to lose. I don't see her winning a lot of crossover. I don't think that Glenn is the favorite to win this district, but I do think he's going to get it closer. And so I would put it at leans Democratic right now.
Okay. Well, this is another one in the Richmond area. House District 72, Schuyler Van Valkenburg, elected in the 2017 wave. He's running for re-election. I think Schuyler is going to have his biggest win thus far. So I think he's going to win by more than 5 points because, I mean, they got Christopher Holmes, the Republican. They got this guy last minute. He hasn't even, I don't think he's even, at least at the last campaign finder supports, I don't even think he ran or raised like 20 grand even, if I recall correctly. I don't think they're really targeting Schuyler. Now, I may be proven wrong. We'll see what happens in the new campaign finder supports that come out in 2 weeks from now, a little bit less than 2 weeks. But I think Schuyler is going to be fine. Now, I think there's a slight room for upset. If you were to tell me that, the 72nd would be in my ratings, likely Democratic 4 years ago, I would say you're insane because the 72nd, everybody thought the 72nd was going to be like, coin flip. It was going to be very, very razor thin close. And then Schuyler won by 5 points against Eddie Whitlock. And I'm not saying again that, it's a sure thing for Schuyler, but his district did get bluer in redistricting in 2019. So he won by a little bit more than he did in 2017. Obviously, incumbency advantage was won. But again, the Republicans don't look like they're targeting him this time. It's not a seat they need for a majority. And I think Schuyler is pretty entrenched in its district, and it's just hard to uproot. Ben, what do you think about this seat? How would you rate it?
Yeah, Chaz, I think I'm going to go with leans Democratic again on this one. Schuyler has a very earnest reputation. Obviously, he broke with the leadership on the redistricting vote. I think that he thought that was going to burnish sort of some of his credentials as sort of a reformer type of candidate. I don't think any of that really matters. I think what it really comes down to in a race like this is where's the tide going? I'm not sure that Schuyler has done things that are going to win a lot of Republican crossover voters. I don't see a big chunk of Youngkin Van Valkenburg voters. And so, I think that is a seat that could flip. That having been said, I think Schuyler did win some crossover vote in 2019 down ballot from the state senator in his area. And obviously his colleague Deborah Rodman had run against Senator Donovan. But Schuyler did win some crossover votes there. So I would put it at leans Democratic. Again, probably closer to likely before toss-up, but that's only because I'm not sure yet that Glenn Youngkin is going to be successful in some of his suburban strategy. But if he is, this one is one that's going to go over the top really fast. And Chaz, I would say I totally concur with what you said about the Republicans, where they're going to put their money and resources because they're looking for 51 seats. Let's not forget the Democrats put their money and resources in 2017 trying to get to 42 seats because they would get more committee seats. And then a whole bunch of others came in with it because of the tide around it. And so sometimes the party committees targeting it in a race like this is not the most important factor because the party committees don't see ahead of the game enough to know what's going on. I would look much more to see how obsessed is the Glenn Youngkin campaign with Henrico County, and if they're really putting their campaign into it because they feel like they have to win Henrico to win, then the seat will become more competitive. And that'll just naturally will happen regardless of what Schuyler's done or what his opponent raises.
Well, I don't think there's really a chance they can win Henrico County. This isn't the 2000s, but they do need to just, lose it comfortably in order to win. I think that's the same situation with Loudoun County. It's just more about, in the suburbs, they lose Prince William, they lose Loudoun, they lose Henrico, but they lose them comfortably while dominating the rurals. They have to get the Trump numbers, but they have to get a little bit of suburban reversion. Now they do have to win some counties that they've lost, such as Chesterfield, Stafford, James City. Stafford and James City did vote for Gillespie in 2017, but that was the last time they voted for a Republican statewide contest. But yeah, I think if they do, I know Glenn Youngkin has been near Schuyler's district in the Wyndham Country Club, which is northwest Henrico, very affluent, very wealthy. Youngkin would need to win an area like that, which was, I think that type of area voted for Biden or very narrowly voted for Trump. He would have to win it by nearly 20 points. So it's hard for me to see that, but we'll see what happens. 91st. This one is a little bit interesting because first off, we have this is likely Democratic. This is Martha Mugler's seat. This was redrawn from a safe Republican district to a pretty Democratic leaning district in 2019. Martha Mugler is one of two Democrats in the House who, in her 2019 bid for the House of Delegates, did better than what Joe Biden got in the seat. Ben, do you want to guess the other one?
Ooh, I'm not sure on that one, Chaz.
I'll give you a hint. Where I am.
Oh, Chris Hurst.
Because students weren't there. So yeah, he did better. In 2019, obviously, Virginia Tech was in person, and then 2020 they were not in person. So that was probably the biggest factor why Chris Hurst did better than Joe Biden. But yeah, so Martha Mugler, though, this is a that's not the situation. It's not a college town district. It is in the Hampton suburbs. It's in Pocosin and Hampton City, but it's the kind of more suburban white parts of Hampton City, and a little bit of York County. But it's a pretty big feat of her to be able to do that, to have that, have her 2019 bid do better than what Biden got, because, Biden did very well in the suburbs in Virginia. So I think this is a likely Democratic race. I'm not impressed by AC Cordoza, the Republican. Ben, what do you think about this seat?
Chaz, I also think this one's likely. Pocosin is a death trap for Democrats, and York County isn't much better. But the thing about Hampton is, and obviously Martha's spouse is also an elected official in Hampton City, and a popular one at that. But the thing about this area and Hampton is they're organized. And so this is a place where Democrats in state elections tend to overperform historically versus what you would think they would get based on the national election results. I think this is a district that voted for the entire Democratic ticket, even in 2013. All those seats we were talking about earlier in Prince William that voted Republican and never reverted, this seat was Democratic back then. And it's because of organization. So I think the Democrats are organized here. I think Martha's well known. I think she's in good shape. And I would put this one at likely.
Okay. Now get into a little bit more competitive territory. House District 21. This is in Virginia Beach. Kelly Converse Fowler beat who's the Republican incumbent in 2017? Ron something?
Ron Villanueva. Who isn't he now in prison?
I don't know. It's a good question.
I believe he's now in prison.
Yeah, he had some sort of corruption scandal in 2017. I think that was a big part of his loss. Um, and then 2019 came around, and Kelly Fowler did even better than she did in 2017, even though she was unseating a Republican incumbent. This is a pretty diverse district, high Filipino population and Black population, but those are two groups which did swing right in 2020, especially the Filipino groups. In some parts of the country, they swung by 20 to 30 points to Trump from Hillary Clinton, but in some areas they remain pretty static. I think this race is lean Democratic. I think Tanya Gould, the Republican candidate, has a very good profile, but she hasn't had much to show for it in terms of finance. But we'll see how that turns out. Ben, what do you think about this seat?
Chaz, I'm going to say this one's a slight lean Democratic. I think Kelly's done a pretty good job as an incumbent, but Virginia Beach is the epicenter in state elections of causing us heartburn historically. And I don't think that's going to change. Excuse me. And in the future, I think that we got a little bit of a break from it during the Trump era. But now the Trump era is over. Virginia Beach has broken our hearts so many times. And all the seats in Virginia Beach are competitive. I mean, Virginia Beach is just a competitive area that tends to swing together. Glenn Youngkin obviously is trying to get some sort of hometown bona fides going down there. I'm not sure if he's been successful with that or not. But so I think this is a slightly Democratic. I think this is, if the tide hits and we lose some, this is one that could survive a tide. And I'm not just saying that because it's the beach, but it can't survive a high tide.
Yeah. I think, for the record, I think Glenn Youngkin is going to carry Virginia Beach. I think all the Republicans are going to carry Virginia Beach right now, not by a big margin. I think it'll be within 5 points. But I think given their ticket, it's got a pretty good makeup. I mean, all of their ticket has roots in Hampton Roads. Youngkin does, obviously Mieres does. He represents the area, and Sears is from. Not Virginia Beach, but the adjacent Norfolk City originally when she was in the House of Delegates. But yeah, House District 40. This is up in your territory, Fairfax and Prince William. But most of the seat is in Fairfax. This is Dan Helmer. He's running for re-election. He first flipped the seat in 2019 after Democrats just missed his seat in 2017. And I would say that's primarily due to underinvestment in that cycle. I think this is a lean Democratic race. I know Harold Pyan, is raising a good amount of money, but it's Fairfax County, so it's Clifton, so it's not surprising in the least that it's got good money. I can maybe see this race turning into likely Democratic down the line, but well, honestly, I could see it go either way down the line, between tilt or likely Democratic, but regardless, I think Helmer is favored. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, Chaz, I'm going to put this one right now as a toss-up. Pyon actually sent out the first mailing of the campaign hit this week. I think he's the first person who's in the mailboxes. It was a oversized postcard with an American flag on one side and the other side talking about how proud he is to be an American as an immigrant. And this is a district that is full of Democratic voters that are Asian. There's a huge Korean population in Centerville. And the warning sign that I would put out for Dan Helmer is Sang Yi. And Sang Yi is a city councilman who is in Fairfax City. He's a Republican. He's a Republican operative on Capitol Hill. And he ran a few years ago before he was on city council against David Bulova. And when Sang Yi ran against David Bulova, even though he lives in Fairfax City, he carried one Democratic precinct in Centerville by a very good margin. It was the Powell precinct. And if you look on your maps, Chaz, you'll see Powell is a Democratic stronghold. And Sang was able to carry it over David Bulova while every other Democrat on the ballot that day won Powell. This is the model that Republicans use that was so successful last year in Orange County, California, of finding people that were a match with the demographic minority communities in the district and picking off some of those voters to undermine the Democrats. It's why Harley Ruda lost in the 48th. It's why Gil Cisneros lost in the 39th.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was why the Republicans won the special and then won again in the 25th with Mike Garcia. This is a model that works well for them. And Harold is very well known in the Korean community. So I don't think Dan Helmer is going to have a whole lot of problem with white Democrats. He might have the same issues the other candidates have with the white swing voters that may trend back Republican after post-Trump. But I think his real problem is in the Korean community. And the Korean community has shown here in Northern Virginia, it will absolutely vote for Republican candidates, even while they vote for every other Democratic candidate on the ticket, if they have a quality Korean Republican candidate. So I think this is a huge, huge danger seat for the Democrats, and I have it as a toss-up.
I think you raised some very good points. Yeah, I know that a lot of people didn't see that coming on the radar between Cisneros and Ruda out in the Los Angeles area, I think we'll see if you're right. I think Helmer's moderately favored, but I think there's definitely room for upset here. Getting to the highly competitive territory here, House District 10. This is Wendy Goditis. This is her seat. This is her third time running. She was elected in 2017 wave, beating Randy Minshew. I think the Republicans have a very good candidate here, Nick Clemente. Nick Clemente has outraised Goditis so far. But I think Goditis is just a slight favorite. Now, she did have a very narrow re-election. It was within 5 points in 2017. Both 2017 and 2019. But just the way this district is trending, it's double-digit Biden. It's hard for me to see it as a toss-up. Currently, at least, I think, maybe down the line, it could be a toss-up, especially if we find out via polls that the statewide races are tighter than everybody thinks, myself included. Ben, what do you think about this seat?
Chaz, Nick Clemente is a great candidate. This is a really big fumble by the Loudoun Democrats to have let him become a Republican. He was a Democrat for a while. And there were some local politics, I think, that drove him to the Republican side, which was just incredibly dumb. And he's a great candidate for this seat, especially around the Leesburg area, which is where the Democratic base is for Wendy Goditis. I don't think they could do much better than Nick. He's earnest. His family is very well known in the community. That also helps him raise a lot of money because his family has a lot of money. But I think, and he runs in those circles, but I think he would be a successful, good candidate even if he didn't come from that kind of money. I think he's done a excellent job in this campaign so far. And so I put this as a toss-up. I think Wendy, could have lost in 2019, but it wasn't a good year for Republicans. I think if Republicans have a better year, Nick could absolutely pick this up. One other interesting thing I'll point out to you is that, this is a seat where moderate Republicans, historically, this is the part of Loudoun County where they have been able to keep a foothold. Eastern Loudoun, the Dick Black machine just took over and would dominate hardline Republicans for years. And it's still very hard for Republicans to overcome that there and get quality candidates on the ballot. This seat with Randy Minshew until he lost in 2017 and it's a moderate area. I believe this used to be, most of the 10th district used to be in the territory of the old 33rd, which was Joe May, for quite some time before it had to be split off because of the growth. So this is an area where I think Nick can be successful. I think he's a great candidate. And so I would put it as a toss-up.
All right. House District 63, we have this tilt Democratic, but honestly, I think LaShrie Saird's campaign she's running a great campaign. So I may move this to lean Democratic as if Kim Taylor continues to underperform financially speaking in these next round of campaign finance reports. But we have this as tilt Democratic because I think Taylor is a pretty good candidate. When she first got in this race, she's from suburban Chesterfield, and Republicans need to not just win Chesterfield. Obviously, they're going to win that part of South Chesterfield County, but they have to do very well. There's some suburban parts of the district that trended away from Republicans in the Trump era. And then you have to also have low enough Black turnout in the seat. And I don't think look at Southside in 2017, right, compared to the 2016 presidential. Southside Virginia has a drop in turnout, and as a result, it swings right. And that's mainly because of the lower Black turnout compared to the previous presidential. So I think this is a pretty competitive seat. Biden didn't even win the seat by double digits. It's a single-digit Biden seat. But I think Aird is slightly favored, maybe even moderately favored. Find out in a few weeks. But yeah, Ben, what do you think about this race?
I think, Chaz, this is one where for maybe only the first or second time today, I'm actually a little bit more optimistic about the Democrats than you are. I think La Charisse will be fine here. I put it as a leans Democratic seat, potentially trending towards a likely.
I would be surprised. I likely is a little too optimistic, I think, but it is a rare occasion to where you are more bullish on the Democrats than I am. I know in 2019, I was a little bit more bullish than you, but I know I beat you in the House, but you beat me in the Senate. But yeah, I know usually, I have better ratings for Democrats than you. But let's go on to the next district. This is a must win, I think, for a Republican majority, House District 73. This is in Henrico County. Rodney Willett is having a rematch with Mary Margaret Castleberg, who he beat by less than 5 points in 2019. Deborah Rodman vacated this seat so that she can run for state Senate that cycle. She lost. And I think Rodney is very slightly favored. But I think Mary Margaret Castleberg is still a very, very, very good candidate for this type of seat. But I think that Rodney, looking at finance, looking at, how Biden did in this district last year, I'm not saying, he's going to get Biden's margins. I think it's definitely a race is going to be within 5 points, but I wouldn't exactly call it a toss-up. Just given the direction the seat is going. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, so this is one that I had as a toss-up in 2019, and I was impressed with Rodney Willett's crossover vote. He outperformed Deborah Rodman in the seat, even though it's her seat.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was more telling than the final vote totals in the margin, was that he was outperforming Deborah as a new candidate. So I think that he actually, as an incumbent, will be even a little bit stronger. Now the Republicans are going to have a better year in 21 than they had in 19, so maybe that will all cancel out. But I would put this into the leans Democratic category.
Okay. So this is another one where you're a little bit more rosy on the Democrats than I am, because, I've got his tilt, but you got his leans. House District 85. This is Alex Askew's seat. He was first elected in 2019. We have this as tilt Democratic. I'm not really impressed by the Republican campaign here. But I think there's room for upset. I think it's a must win for a Republican majority. So, it's a beach seat. They're going to throw everything they can at it so that they can actually claw their way back into the majority. Ben, what do you think about this seat?
Chaz, I have this one as a toss-up. I think that Alex has been a good incumbent, but this is the kind of seat where I think it's likely to follow the top of the ticket. I don't think the Republican candidate's going to offend anyone out from not voting for her if they're voting for the Republicans at the top of the ticket. And I think that Glenn Youngkin has a slight advantage to carrying the seat over McAuliffe, but it will be very competitive. And I think the seat will go along with whoever carries it on top of the ticket. So I have it as a toss-up.
All right. House District 83, I think Nancy Guy is very slightly favored for re-election now. I would have said she would be the underdog against Chris Stolle, but Chris Stolle lost the primary to Tim Anderson, who ran to the right in the primary. And I think even Tim Anderson was surprised that he won it, to be quite frank. But I don't think, Tim Anderson is really as good as a candidate as Stolley. This is double-digit Biden seat. Now, Nancy Guy did only win her first reelection or her first bid for the House of Delegates in 2019 by 40 votes, something like that. But I think she's slightly favored. I wouldn't say it's a toss-up. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, so Tim Anderson's a clown. And this was one where Republicans just completely fumbled it. I mean, he was the lawyer, Chaz, that tried to get Louise Lucas removed for the issue around the statues in Portsmouth.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And, which is outside of his district, but he's sticking his nose over there. And, and of course, a judge smacked it down and pointed out that law isn't even really intended for legislators, which you would think a lawyer, all the other lawyers on Twitter were saying, that was going to happen. You would think someone like Tim Anderson, who is a lawyer, would be able to read the law enough to know that, but apparently not. I think it goes to speak to an issue we won't get into on your show today, but just a broader issue of how poorly of a job the Virginia State Bar does of policing its own members. It's pathetic in the state, who's allowed to practice law and like what they're allowed to do before they lose their law license. And what he did with Louise Lucas, and at huge public expense, to go through and do that to a state senator, I think is just outrageous. Now, in terms of ginning up the right-wing base, it absolutely does that. So maybe he understood it was bad legally and good politically, and in which case, like, give him credit for that, because he absolutely is very good at ginning up the hardcore Republican base and then use that and beat Chris Stolley in the primary. So on that note, I give him full credit. You sometimes in politics, you got to go win. He won. Donovan said he's not as good of a candidate as Chris Stolley. So I absolutely would put this race as a toss-up. If it was Chris Stolley, I might even towards the end of the election think about putting this at slight leans Republican pickup if it was Chris Stolley, particularly if Glenn Youngkin's doing well down there. Tim Anderson, we'll put it at slight leans Democratic. But I honestly think it's closer to leans Democratic than it is to toss-up because he's such a bad candidate. But his best chance to win is that Republicans get some coattails there, and he'll have a chance. I do think some of the Stolley voters in the primary will vote for Nancy Guy, though, because they know he's an idiot.
Yeah, I think Nancy's going to do better than she did in 2019. I would be surprised if Tim Anderson won, but I think there is room for upset, given her first election margin. Or it could be a Dawn Adams situation, where Dawn narrowly beat a moderate Republican incumbent and then won handily. But I don't think it's going to be that situation. House District 12, this is a toss-up. This is where I hail from now, Blacksburg, Virginia, Virginia Tech, go Hokies. Chris Hurst he first flipped the 12th in 2017, beating Joseph Yost. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, he was one of two House Democrats who won in 2017 who did better than Northam. And he just ran a hell of a campaign. I mean, he was winning. Anytime I talk to the guy, I say, you're going to win Radford West this time. Because he won this precinct in the western part of Radford City. And he's the only Democrat besides Ralph Northam in 2013 who won this precinct. It's a very, it's a lean Republican precinct. It's very, like working class. And I don't know that he'll win it this time. But, we'll see if he does. But I think this is going to be his toughest election yet. Look, I think college students are very motivated to turn out against Trump in 2017, motivated to turn out against him again in 2019 and get a Democratic majority. I think, he was very, very happy when Virginia Tech announced it was going to be an in-person semester this fall. I think, though, that the ticket that the Democrats have at the top, and especially now that Biden's in office, I think they're going to have a very, very big problem motivating progressive voters and young voters, especially. I think that this is a toss-up seat, pure toss-up. I think it's going to be a toss-up until Election Day. I don't see it going to tilt Democratic. I don't see it going to tilt Republican. I'd be very surprised. This was a seat that Biden won by, I think it was like less than 7 points in 2020. But of course, again, as I mentioned earlier, Virginia Tech wasn't in person that semester. So that was a big reason why. If it was in person, Biden would have won the seat by, I think, nearly double digits or barely double digits. But yeah, Ben, what do you think about this race?
Yeah, Chaz, I'm so glad we get to talk about a Southwest Virginia race. So we don't forget about that whole corner of the state and that there's still some competitive politics down there.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be when we would talk about competitive House races, we'd spend a lot of time talking about the mountains and different areas in Southwest Virginia. So decades ago, before Rick Boucher, when Rick Boucher unseated the Republican congressman down there, his name was William Wampler. Do you remember what William Wampler's nickname was, Chaz?
I do not.
The Great Bald Eagle of the Southwest. Because he was bald. And, and as we know, like Chris Hurst's campaign in 2017 was run by the not so great bald eagle that now is the DPVA executive director, Andrew Whitley. So,
well, you could say that, but I think the campaign was pretty well run because, again, he outran Northam.
And I think that, when Chris Hurst announced in 2017, I have to tell you, Chaz, I was horrified because he got such bad political advice right from the start. I heard he was going to run, and I followed his career for a long time, actually been friends with him even before, the tragedy that made him so well internationally known. And he was a very good reporter anchor down in Roanoke. People knew Chris Hurst and they liked Chris Hurst, and that's why he won in 2017. He had universal name ID. He was extremely well liked. And so I wouldn't necessarily credit the campaign for what he did himself. And I think that Chris has done a fairly good job in the legislature and representing that area. Now, the issue with his drunk driving is going to be a humongous thing that he's going to have to deal with this year.
Yeah.
With that on the side, put that aside for a minute. I think he's favored. I think Chris's district will vote Democratic this year on top of the ticket. I don't see Democrats abandoning him because
definitely not
because of the drunk driving. I think that he's going to have some tough conversations with people and really own up to what happened. But that's the kind of incident, Chaz, where to me, when you look at geopolitics, usually most incumbents can survive that, as embarrassing and terrible as it is, one time. If it happens again, he's done. But, as it is, I think he can survive it. I think the district's going to vote Democratic. I think he's done a good job. I think his campaign will probably be better run this time than it was in 2017. But not if Andrew sticks his nose in too much. And so I think that Chris Hurst is favored, and I'm going to put this at leans Democratic.
Well, that's another one where you're a little bit more rosy on the Democrats than I am. I'm very surprised. I think Andrew did a good job, though. I think he did a good job, but you and I will have to agree to disagree. But yeah, just the big thing is I think it's going to be hard to motivate the college students. But you do bring up a good point about the DUI. This is his first election since the DUI. But what I've been telling people about this is that this country has a very, very short attention span, has a very short memory. It's hard. Now, are the Republicans going to, send out mailers and run ads about the DUI? Absolutely. They're going to do that. And they'll probably say that, something like he used his status to get away with it, which, he didn't. The trooper let him off. And I know investigation has shown that, the trooper has done other things for people who obviously aren't members of the Virginia House of Delegates. But, I think the possible issue with youth turnout and progressive turnout and the DUI make this, and I think Jason Ballard is a pretty good candidate as well. I think Chris Hurst is going to have his worst performance in Giles. That's where Ballard is from. I think he's going to have his worst performance in Giles. in these, this is the third go around. But yeah, this is one where I think it's a coin flip. But you are a little bit more rosy on the Democrats than me. The other toss-up we have in our forecast are two toss-ups. The other one is House District 28. That's Josh Cole's seat. We were talking a little bit about this earlier. I think Josh Cole. I think the Republican candidate isn't great. I think she's pretty mediocre, but given the closeness of this seat, and I think that, I think Stafford is going to go Republican for Glenn Youngkin, first time since Gillespie in 2017, very narrowly. I think that, it's going to be a close race, regardless of the candidate quality. You're talking about the lack of ticket splitting. And usually also, ticket splitting in almost every seat in the House of Delegates benefits Republicans compared to the top of the ticket. But yeah, I have this as a toss-up. Ben, what about you?
Chaz, I think you're absolutely right. Toss-up. The seat is quintessentially competitive and has been for quite some time with Democratic Fredericksburg and more Republican-leaning Stafford County. Obviously, as the tide has turned for Democrats, it's become a friendly area for us during the Trump years. I think it's a must-win for statewide Republicans, and I don't see a lot of Youngkin Cole voters. So I think this is absolutely a toss-up race.
Okay. Now going to seats that Republicans are favored in our forecast. House District 66, this is Kirk Cox's seat. He is not running for re-election. He ran for governor, but did not win the convention. I like to, when referring to Democratic recruitment here, I like to say that Democrats fumble the football in their own 30-yard line, because I don't think Katie Sponsor is a good candidate. I think she's pretty mediocre. Now, the thing is, though, this is a double-digit Biden seat. It's a pretty Democratic-leaning district, and the only reason why Kirk Cox won re-election is because, he's a 30-year incumbent. And also, I don't think that Sheila Bynum-Coleman is I think on paper, compared to her 2017 performance, she did do better than North in some precincts, but in person, she wasn't a great candidate based on everyone who was talking to. Now, that's one race I got wrong in 2019, though. So Cox beat my expectations. But I see this race as tilt Republican. I think Mike Cherry, even though he's more conservative than what the campaign Cox crafted, it's funny, 2017, he was an ardent conservative, and then 2019 is like, no, I'm a moderate. But he needed to do that to win the seat. But Cherry, even though he's a conservative, he has to blow out in Colonial Whites, where he hails from. He's on the city council, if I recall correctly. And I just don't think Sponsor is a good candidate. I really don't think so. She ran pretty far behind the Northam margin in the precincts that have been carried over from the previous 66 to the new 66. Now, this could be a seat that if Democrats want to, save her ass, they can. And really, they just have to have whoever is running it give the reins over to the House Democratic Caucus in order for them to flip this seat. Ben, what do you think?
So, Chaz, I have this one at slight leans Democratic.
Really?
And I'm going to go back to, remember I told you you're going to get tired of listening to my rules over and over and over again? I'm going to go back to the first rule we started the show with. Open seats don't have crossover voting of substance. And this is a seat that I think is going to vote for the statewide Democratic ticket by a narrower margin than it has during the Trump era. But I do think that Terry McAuliffe is going to beat Glenn Youngkin here even in a 50-50 race. Yeah. I believe that Terry McAuliffe will be winning this district. And so there's just not crossover. Think about the Josh Cole race from 2017 when he was running against a moderate Stafford supervisor with a long history in the community. And Josh Cole still almost won in 2017, which is what set him up for 19. The same thing applies here. It doesn't matter. The candidates matter much, much less than the top of the ticket when you're in an open seat race. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with Katie Sponsler that's going to cause her to lose statewide Democratic votes. So I'm going to put this one at slight leans Democratic. Pick up.
Wow. That's I'm raising my eyebrows. But I mean, I get your argument for it. Um, and, I do think that, all the Democrats are going to win this seat in the statewide bids. Um, but I do think currently, at least, but, we are in July, early July. I think there is currently enough crossover vote compared to, the median. I forget what the median is, but I think the median is, I think it's like something 6 points or 7 points compared to Biden's 2020 margin compared to the average overperformance or underperformance by House Democrats in 2019. I think that would be enough to flip it, not flip it, keep it in Republican hands. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what kind of campaign sponsor builds, and maybe my rating will change. Maybe we'll go to toss up. Maybe it'll go to tilt Democratic even by election day. But we'll see. I'm not really impressed by her primary performance. I'm not really that impressed by the campaign, but she's put in so far. But she's got time on her side. One seat I do have Republicans favored in to flip is House District 75. This is Roz Tyler's seat. This was a race. I had it as my dark horse in 2019, and I'm glad I did because she barely won re-election against Otto Washman. I think Otto Washman has, I think he came closer than he thought he would. I think Republicans are going to spend heavy in this seat. I'm not impressed by the Tyler campaign. Now, I think there could be an argument for a toss-up here. Or even, if you want to make the argument that even though Southside Virginia is going to, swing right like it usually does from the 2020 or from the presidential to the gubernatorial, if you're saying that, there will be enough Black turnout in Southside to keep the seat, I think there's an argument for even tilt Democratic. But again, Justin Fairfax only won the seat by, I think like 3.5 points or something like that. And then Roz Tyler won by even narrow margin. She lost Sussex County, which is majority Black, in 2019. I think that Republicans are very slight favorites in this seat. I'm not impressed by the Tyler campaign whatsoever. What about you, Ben?
Chaz, I have this one as a toss-up. Obviously, the politics in rural Virginia are very different than most of the seats we're talking about around the state. And so there's a lot of different dynamics going on here that aren't going on in other areas. This is a very diverse rural area. I remember in 2005 when this seat opened up and Roz Tyler ran, and there had been a good old boy Democrat who was retiring, and two good old boy white Democrats got in the primary and were feuding with each other. I believe one of them was the son of the delegate. Another one was a really well-known guy in the district, I think had run for other things. And Roz Tyler, who was on the board of supervisors, jumped in the race. And I think it was a 5-way, but there were 3 major candidates, and got the Black vote and was able to win. Essentially it was a third. But she got the biggest chunk of the thirds and beat them both. And there was a ton of consternation back in 2005 that they were going to try to throw the seat to the Republicans because they were so angry and upset that an African-American was going to get it. And it just never materialized. She was able to go through and the Democrats stuck with her, and the Democrats won the seat. And I think that, her underperforming in 2019 has probably set off some alarm bells for the caucus so that they know they need to really protect her this time. So I think she can survive this election. I think Terry McAuliffe certainly will put a lot more resources into the rural Black vote in 2021 than Roz Tyler did in 2019 in terms of turning them out. And so I think that it's a toss-up. I think she can survive, but she certainly put herself on the radar as being extremely vulnerable.
All right. House District 27. And we for our rating for House District 75, it was tilt Republican. I know I said Republicans are favored, but I don't think I mentioned the rating. House District 27, we have this lean Republican. Roxanne Robinson is running for her 4th term, I think, Ben, right?
Sounds right.
She barely won re-election in 2017 and 2019. 2017 was closer than expected, and then 2019 was about what I expected. I got that seat right. It was a very tough pick. I think Larry Barnett was a very good candidate, and Democrats have a very good candidate in Deborah Gardner, I think. I think she's one of the top recruits for them, for the House Democratic Caucus. But I just have a hard time seeing a first-time candidate flip the seat after Democrats weren't able to flip it in 2017, 2019 when Trump was in office, and now Trump is gone. And I think that Republicans are going to do better in 2017, 2019. So I have as lean Republican. Ben, what about you?
So Chaz, I'm going to say something that's going to shock you.
Mhm.
You're sitting down. You ready for this?
All right.
I believe that from 2011 through 2018, through all the statewide we had, and I'm not sure if this matched in the presidential or not, that this seat was the closest seat in the state to the 51st district, which we talked about earlier. That these were two seats that were constantly meshing with very similar type of Republican numbers in the good years for them, very similar Democratic numbers in the good year for Democrats. I don't think it swung as hard to the Democrats as the 51st did in 17,
Right.
but it also was less of a little bit less Republican to begin with in some of the other elections. So these suburban seats are all following the same pattern. And I can't in good conscience say that a seat like the 51st is Democratic favored and that Roxanne Robinson is favored in her seat. I think that it's one or the other. And again, I think we have to see how these statewide elections break out. But if Terry McAuliffe carries Virginia, I believe this will be a seat that he will be competitive in again. And the Democratic candidate will have a decent chance. So for right now, for incumbency, I will put it at slight leans Republican. But it's the kind of seat where, again, you've got these Cuccinelli-Gillespie voters that have suddenly started voting Democratic. And what do you do from there? And I think that, this is Chesterfield's emerging for us in 10 years from now. This may be a pretty good seat for Democrats if the trend lines continue. But for right now, I think a moderate Republican can still hold it. And I think Robinson has also benefited by being in the minority instead of having people talking about the bad bills Republicans are passing. She can run against the bills Democrats are passing. So I put this as slight leans Republican, but man, this one really could be competitive for the Democrats if Terry McAuliffe has a good year.
Yeah, I think in redistricting, this seat is going to be a pretty solid Democratic pickup. Based if the map that is drawn is fair, I think it would be based on the way I've looked at drawing the Richmond area, based on the population growth there. I think Democrats are going to pick up a seat in the area regardless. But yeah, House District 84. Glenn Davis is running for re-election again after failing in his lieutenant gubernatorial bid. He's running against Kim Milnick, who narrowly won the Democratic primary. It was a very tough pick, but I'm glad I picked her, and I know you picked her as well to win. I think that Davis is in the lean Republican race. It's
Chaz, while we're talking about that, let's not forget to say that the person who won the VPEP contest this year, which I never enter, but actually cited our podcast on that primary.
That's right.
Was able to primarily get her picks.
Yeah. I forgot her name, but I did see that. And if you're listening, I want to say thank you so much. I'm glad we were of use. And congratulations to you. I forgot her name, but I remember just when I came back to Twitter after I moved in, scrolling through the notifications, and I saw something about that.
Well, she keeps listening. She's going to keep winning the contest, and we'll all remember her name.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, but anyway, so the 84th, I think it's in basically the same argument for this lean Republican rating as the 27th. Weren't able to win it in 17 and 19. I don't think they're going to be able to win it in 21. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I'll put this one at leans Republican also because I think Glenn Youngkin's going to do well at the beach. But my goodness, Glenn Davis is such a whiny little baby. At some point, when the tide actually hits for Democrats again, he might wash out into the ocean this time, Chaz, just because he's got so many tears flying out of his house that I think it'd be the first one to flood in the neighborhood. So, he just, what a baby he is. And it's hard to believe that he continues to win re-election with some of his bizarro land behaviors, but I don't know if it's a drinking thing or whether he thinks he's like being really funny on social media, but man, like his behavior is inappropriate and he has a baby when he's called out for it.
Yeah, he has a weird series of tweets. I will say that. Not like Chuck Grassley level or something, but yeah. All right, well, going another seat in the Virginia Beach area, House District 81. This did vote for Biden, but I think Barry Knight is going to be fine. I don't really think the Democrats are going to target him. I will say that he had a narrower re-election than I thought he would in 2019. I think it was Len Myers was the Democrat who ran, and he came closer than I thought. But I think Barry Knight's going to win in the high single digits right now. We have this as a likely Republican. What about you, Ben?
I concur, Chaz. I have a likely Republican.
Okay. And then we have House District 96, which is on the Lower Peninsula in James City County and York County. Mark Downey. I think Mark Downey's a great candidate. I think doctors, we know doctors do well in Virginia. Just ask Ralph Northam and Starla Kaiser and Cameron Webb. Even though the latter two didn't win, they overperformed the top of the ticket, especially Starla Kaiser. But I think again, this is a Trump seat, Trump 2020 seat. So even though I think Downey is going to be having a better run campaign than 2019. I think Batten has the incumbency advantage now. It's a Trump seat. I think this is a likely Republican seat. What about you?
I have it at safe Republican right now, Chaz, but I think, it's one of those seats that's on the periphery where a good campaign could put it into the likely category where you start thinking about it in play. But for right now, until we see more, I put it at safe.
Okay. House District 100. This is one where the Eastern Shore is weird. And also, I don't think the Democrats really have a good candidate here in Finale Norton. But Rob Bloxham, he doesn't really raise much money at all, but he doesn't need to win. And yet his seat pretty much almost always votes for Democrats in the statewide tickets. I know, if I recall correctly, I do think Jill Vogel won the seat in the lieutenant governor bid in 2017. Even though she was losing by 5 points or something like that. She won it very narrowly in the 100th. But I think Bloxham is headed for his best win since the Obama years. I think this is a likely Republican seat. I don't know how it's going to vote in the statewide bids, honestly. I think it can go either way. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, again, I have this as a safe Republican. Look, the Eastern Shore is weird, but it's also where Ralph Northam's from, and I don't think if Democrats couldn't get a hold of it when Northam was on the ballot in 2017, forget about it ever again.
Well, they came close in 2019 as well, and Northam wasn't on the ballot.
I think that he's the governor, though.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a fair point. If you were to say that, the elections were on the, a referendum on the governor. But yeah, I'm surprised by safe Republican. I think that's a little bit too bearish. I could maybe see a very likely Republican rating, but I will say I'm not really impressed with the Norton campaign. And
I don't have any such thing, Chaz. So I have to go with one or the other.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, the 26. This is Harrisonburg and Rockingham counties. I think the seat would have voted for. I'm not sure whether it would have voted for Biden in 2020 if JMU was in person. But regardless, we have this as very likely Republican. I know that William Helsley, he's going to bring money into the race, but I think Tony Wilt is going to be fine. But redistricting here is going to be very interesting. This is going to be a very, very competitive seat in the 2020s if the map is fair. What about you, Ben?
Chaz, I have it at safe.
All right. And then the last one is House District 62. This has the most moderate Republican in the Virginia House, Carrie Coyner. She was first elected in 2019. and she won by double digits. Even though this seat voted for Tim Kaine, it did vote for Biden, if I recall correctly. But I don't think she's going to win by double digits. But I think, well, actually, maybe she will win by double digits. Who knows? Who knows? But I think at the very least, high single digits. And I'm not really impressed by the Jasmine Gore campaign so far. I think she's a good candidate on paper, but hasn't shown any financial prowess to put this as a more competitive seat. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I also have this one at Safe Chaz, but can I nominate a few seats that we haven't talked about?
Some that are solid in our ratings that you think are competitive?
Yeah, that I want to put I'm going to put a little different spin on.
Sure.
Cool. Well, so let me go through and start on the Democratic side. Candy King's race, 2nd District, I have as a likely Democratic race, not as a safe Democratic race. I think Candy did a great job in blowing out that primary opponent that she had. But that having been said, the 2nd District can be competitive in elections. I think in the last 2 governor's elections, we won it by, 2013, we won it by it's a little bit. And then 2017, it was open and Jennifer Carroll Foy won it in a landslide. This year, I think Republicans are going to get a little bit of their legs underneath them in Stafford County. That's what made the race a competitive race in the special election. So I would put that as a likely Democratic seat. And I don't know, Chaz, if you want me to pause and let you respond to a couple of these, or you want me just to move through
them? Yeah, you can keep going through them. Well, we can go one at a time. I think the second, I get your argument for the second. It's just so blue now. Biden won it by over 20 points. I don't know anything about the Republican, but maybe if the Republican builds a all right campaign, I can see an argument for very likely our ratings. But I think McAuliffe is going to win this district by double digits, and Candy King will win by at least high single digits. But I think she's on to a double digit win. But yeah, let's go on to the next seat.
Okay, 34th District, Kathleen Murphy. Many competitive elections here, and actually this seat is the home of both gubernatorial candidates. As Jonathan Martin from the New York Times has put it, this is a McLean versus Great Falls showdown. And I think that Great Falls is exactly the kind of place I expect to see bounce back to the Republicans this year. I think McLean is much more likely to hang with the Democrats, especially in some of the parts of McLean that Rep Sullivan represents even more so. But Kathleen's part of McLean also. She has the more Republican side of McLean. And so I have this one as a likely Democratic seat. Again, it's not safe. And I actually think this one could have been competitive and in the leans category had Jennifer Adeli won the primary.
Yeah. What do you think about Gary Pan as a candidate?
I'm not super impressed, but I wasn't super impressed with their candidates here in previous cycles that were in fact competitive with Kathleen. So, I think that Gary Pan at least follows that model that Republicans are doing to have more diverse candidates. Obviously, anyone can fundraise who's from McLean. So, he's not a bad candidate.
All right. You got any more seats?
Yeah. So as we're going through these, obviously you get the entire, safe seats of Internova, which we know are tough. 67th District, this one's like the 32nd pickup Democrats had in 2017. I also have it at this moment, Chaz, at Safe Republican, but I put it, I'm Safe Democratic, but I put that as like put an asterisk on the Safe Democratic there. It's one to watch that could become likely. Western Fairfax is the kind of area where I'm expecting to see some movement back towards the Republicans this year. And so then of course there's the 79th District, which we were consulting on in the primary for Nadarius Clark, who's a great young candidate who just beat Steve Heretic. I think that race, I would put it at likely instead of solid for Democratic, because again, it's an open seat. And so open seats always behave a little bit differently, but I think Nadarius is well on his way to becoming a delegate, but when we say likely, we say it's 90%, it's not 100%. Mm-hmm. And I think that as a new candidate, this is his first time facing a Republican. So I put that into the likely category. Irene Shin, 86th District. Um, you know, again, she knocked out a controversial incumbent, but the 86 had been Republican up until 2017, when I'm sorry, 2015, when Jennifer Boysko won it. I think Irene will win this, but it's actually one that I've got as a, again, put an asterisk on it. I think she hasn't done much since the primary. She's not particularly well known in the district yet. I think she's going to underperform. And I think it's going to be one that like Republicans are going to be eyeing in 2 years to see how exactly it's drawn, and to see if they think they have any sort of ability to get back in there. So long as there's a few super Democratic precincts that are south of the town of Herndon, as long as those are continue to be in the district, Democrats should carry it. But again, I would just put a little asterisk on that. And I put a little asterisk on the Suhas race in the 87th. I do believe that is solidly Democratic, but I put an asterisk on it again because I think that race could become more competitive later. It's probably maybe a couple cycles out of being really competitive again, but I do think it can be competitive, and it's something I've got to watch on. On the Republican side, obviously, most of the Republican seats are pretty safe after having survived the Trump era. If you're still a Republican, you're in pretty good shape. But there's a couple on there that I would put on. I'm keeping an eye on. 33rd district race, Paul Syker versus Dave LaRock, I have as a likely Republican race, not a safe Republican race. I think it'd be very hard to pick up Western Loudoun, but it's not impossible. In fact, Western Loudoun used to have a real Democratic tinge to it. I don't know if you remember this era, Chaz, but Mark Herring actually ran against Russ Potts out there and carried Western Loudoun back for the state Senate before he was elected into the other seat from Loudoun County. So Western Loudoun had a little bit of a Democratic bent to it. In recent era, it's polarized where Western Loudoun has gone further to the right and Eastern's gone to the left. But I think a candidate who runs a good campaign out in Western Loudoun could still be competitive. And so that is one that I just would, let's keep an eye on that. We'll call that likely. And I think, always am keeping an eye on the Rob Bell seat. I don't think that it's going to be competitive this year, but I always think that's one that could come onto the horizon at some point in the future. And the last one is Chaz, the 82nd district open seat. I think Ann Tata, what a great candidate the Republicans got there. But I have it as a likely seat. It's an open seat. It's something where we expect the Republicans to do well in Virginia Beach this year, but that's not a given. And so I wouldn't put it at safe. I'm going to put it at likely and just keep it out there as if Terry McAuliffe has a better night than people are expecting and he's able to carry this seat, I'm not sure that there's going to be a lot of crossover in there either.
Yeah, if Terry McAuliffe is winning the 82nd, then he's doing better than Tim Kaine did, most likely, because Tim Kaine lost his seat, if I recall correctly, while he was winning by 16 points. So yeah, it's tough for me to see some of these seats. I mean, all of them are Trump won, all the Republican ones you listed. Now some of them are narrow Trump wins. Actually, no, all of them are narrow Trump wins, single digits. But regardless, I don't think the Democratic campaigns are going to have anything strong enough to make these into our ratings competitive. But yeah, well, it's good to compare. I'm glad we got to compare. I was surprised by some things compared to where you are more rosy on the Democrats than me. Because usually, most of these, it is the other way around. I think that's how it's always been since I started in 2017. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Ben. And best of luck to the both of us in our predictions this year. But me personally, I hope I beat you again.
All right, Chaz, that's great. And we'll keep our eyes on the ball here because we might get another election next year, and we might have to just keep these shows going all the way through 3 years in a row.
It is funny you mentioned that because I'm having State Senator Scott Servell on to talk a little bit more about that next week for our listeners. But yeah, 2022.
Who's coming on, Chaz? I never heard of him.
Scott Servo,
Where does he represent?
he's the state senator from Fairfax.
He's a senator from Fairfax?
State senator. I know you know who he is. Never heard of him.
I better go look this up. What part of Fairfax?
The eastern part. Well, Prince William and Stafford and.
Are you talking about the part in Maryland over by MGM?
I don't know about that.
You sure he's a Virginia senator?
Yeah, it's the Virginia senator.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll have to check him out.
All right. Well, Ben, it's always a pleasure to have you on, and I'll make sure to have you on again at some point before Election Day this November. Right. And we can compare ratings then.
All right.
But yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.